Where we would do something different in hindsight is with George, who was racing both Red Bulls. They were on a different strategy.
Hi, I'm Cameron, and today I'm joined by Shove to answer your questions about the Italian Grand Prix. So, Shove, we had a question in from one of our fans via Weibo. We've had a couple of races now to do some analysis. So I was wondering, what is the overall evaluation of the upgrade package that we introduced in Spa?
Over the last 3 races, we've done various compares of the packages and principally comparing the floor. And what we are confident in is that it's generating the load that we expect. How do we know that? We're measuring the forces that it generates on the road through the suspension. We are also looking at the pressures that are generated across the car, and we can correlate that with what we're seeing in the wind tunnel, and that allows us to get a pretty decent read on whether it's doing what we expect. It's important to note this was not a very large gain that we were expected. It was quite a small package that we introduced, but we're confident that it is generating that load. The more difficult question that we need to answer is there anything subtle in the handling characteristics that this package might be doing that we haven't anticipated? And that's quite difficult to assess because the car will perform differently track to track. Some tracks it's been working very well. Other circuits we've struggled with the balance of the car regardless of the aerodynamic spec. And yes, the last 2 races haven't been as good as some of the ones that preceded it. It may well be that's just the normal variation from track to track. But that's what we're going to be looking at over the next few days. And on top of that, there are other updates that we're bringing into the system. So there's quite a lot for us to consider, but we do have a lot of data now, and we can go off and use the next few days to learn what we can from that.
We saw an incredibly close qualifying session over in Monza, the top 6 separated by less than 0.2 of a second. I know Lewis was a little bit disappointed with his lap, so does that mean that there was maybe a little bit of pace left out there?
I'm sure we could have done a bit better, and the root of Lewis's frustrations is evident when you look at the GPS data to see that going into that final corner, we were within around half a tenth of Lando and his pole position lap, but then the last corner for Lewis didn't work out particularly well. He lost a bit of time there, and had it not been for that, he could have easily been on the front row, if not challenging for pole. Now, not a dissimilar story with George as well. He was, again, pretty close going into that final corner. It was a bit better for him, and that earned him the P3 position. But what we've seen in the recent races is that fight for the front of the grid is actually extending all the way down to P7, P8. You can get so many cars there just within 0.2 of a second. And that's the sort of margin where it really comes down to whether the drivers put that lap together. And frustratingly for Lewis, he'd shown great pace in Q2, didn't quite get it right for that final run in Q3, and you can drop all the way down to P6. It's just how tight it is at the moment.
So quite early on in the race, George suffered some front wing damage. How much did that affect the performance of the car?
I mean, it certainly had a big effect on the performance of the car. How we measure that is very similar to the way that we assess the performance of an update kit. So we're comparing the loads, the pressures that we're seeing on the car, and we're referencing those to what we think it should generate in those conditions. So after that contact, we see a significant drop. What would that equate to? Well, were it pure downforce, it would be about 0.4 of a second. However, when you lose it all off the front, the driver can't get round corners. You've got big long turns there like Parabolica and you're understeering. So you can probably double that, more like 0.8 of a second was what he was losing in that early stint. Now, you've then got the question, do we bring it in? Do we change the wing? We can have that conversation based on performance, but in the end, it was actually just based on the safety of George, the other drivers on track. We could see that the wing was starting to deteriorate further, and at that point, we decided to stop for an early stop, go to the hard tyre, fit the spare front wing and carry on from there. But that really damaged his whole race. From there it was almost impossible to recover.
And there was so much going on in those opening few corners. Were we able to ascertain exactly how the damage occurred?
Well, we know how it occurred because we've got the onboard cameras that we can look at. The issue for George, though, sort of goes all the way back to turn one, where he was coming down into turn one. Oscar had come across him, that will inherently lose a lot of downforce. He then was caught out by how early Oscar had braked. That meant that George had to take to the escape road, and then when he came out, he'd lost position. So then going into the second chicane, he's got Max and Sergio on his right-hand side, and the damage occurred where he just got his nose in close to Max's rear wheel. That made contact. That was what broke the front wing. But really, that was a racing incident, but really went all the way back to turn one, where because of those positions lost, other cars coming by and attacking, he got into that scrap.
We had a question in from one of our fans on Facebook asking, why didn't we go for a one-stop strategy?
Well, we were talking about it in the lead up to the race, and the really difficult thing to know was how were those hard tyres going to hang on. No one had done any significant running on them. They'd all been saving the 2 sets that you get for the race itself. We knew what would be causing that degradation, which is where you get this graining. It can happen on the front and the rear. That drives a drop of grip, and that was the thing that we were anticipating. Now, the first stint, it was quite bad with everyone on the medium tyre. Then when we got into the second stint, the big question was, can these go to the end, or are we going to have to make a change? With Lewis's race, he was tucked up behind Carlos, and it didn't really make any difference whether he did a 2 or a 1 stop, because Carlos had fresher tyres. It was unlikely we were going to be able to pass on the same strategy, so we decided to go to the 2 stop to do something different. Where we would do something different in hindsight is with George, who was racing both Red Bulls. They were on a different strategy. They did hard, so we knew that they were going to be on a 2 stop, and having seen the tyres that we took off George's car when we fitted the tyres for the final stint, they were actually had a lot more rubber remaining than we expected. They were nice and clean, and we've no doubt that he would have been able to go to the finish. Yes, he got ahead of Sergio anyway on the 2 stop, but critically we think he would have been able to finish ahead of Max had he 1 stop from that point. So you could see up and down the field, teams weren't sure whether to do it or not. Ferrari were in an interesting position where on the same strategy they were unlikely to beat the McLaren. So you could see the attraction for them to try the 1 stop. Very, very well driven by Charles, but really interesting data and quite an unusual race for the tyres to see them behaving in this way, where some people are dropping very early and others are able to go a very, very long way.
We heard over the radio both our drivers were having issues with their seats at various points over the weekend. What were those issues, and do we know what the cause was?
Well, the most significant cause is in Monza it was extremely hot. So the seat and the car is always running pretty hot. There's a lot of heat generated by the power unit that you're trying to dissipate. You've also got a lot of electronic boxes, and those are working quite hard, and they generate their own temperature. So you're trying to lose that out of the cockpit. You've also got the car down the straights in Monza. There's a few places where the plank's hitting the road, and that will in itself generate temperature through friction that will start to sort of conduct up through the floor of the car and into the driver's seat. So with the ambient temperature at 34, nothing can be below that. You've also got numerous heat sources, and it just pushes it up. So the cockpit starts to get considerably above a driver's body temperature. It's then very, very, very hard for them to cool down, and the heat just builds and builds. Now, they're used to driving in these very difficult environments. It's just that when you get the very hottest races, it's a bit extreme, and it really does test them. You know, they do a lot of training. They do a lot of training at temperature. But the fact is, once the cockpit's getting hotter than they are, getting rid of that heat is nigh on impossible. Now, we are looking at ways that we can improve the situation for our drivers. Within the sport as well, they're looking at means that we can apply additional equipment to the car at these exceptional races that will keep the drivers a bit cooler. But as I said, it is a very challenging environment, and that is why they do so much training.
So we saw Kimi Antonelli make his F1 debut in Free Practice 1. Will he have any more opportunities for a free practice session before the end of the season?
Yes, there will be, because the regulations require that both of our race drivers give up their seats for a Friday practice session. Kimi, being our driver for next year, of course we're going to use him. He obviously didn't get as much mileage as we hoped for. We have been doing, and we are doing, work with some of our previous cars, giving Kimi the opportunity to experience the car, the tyres over a range of circuits. So that's going to continue. But yeah, a bit of a shame that he had that accident at Parabolica. The pace was certainly good. We'll chat to him about building up a bit more gently in future and how you approach the race weekend. But yes, we're looking forward to getting him in the car again. We'll pick the right circuit for that. We've got a lot of sprint races coming up, so you're not going to want to have a race driver missing their only free practice session at a sprint race, so limited choice. But yes, he will be back in, and we're looking forward to getting him in the car.
So Shav, next up on the calendar is Baku, a track that's got some unique challenges. Are we able to predict how we think we might go there?
Well, Baku's always been a really difficult circuit to guess where you're going to fall in the order. The other issue you've got this year is any given track, you can end up with at least 3, if not 4 teams, all within a tenth or two of each other. So that makes it very hard to predict where they're all going to fall in qualifying and where people will stack out in race pace. We would expect McLaren to be quick. We've also seen Ferrari recently put in some strong performance, and you'd never ever discount Red Bull. So it is challenging, but Baku's an unusual circuit because you've got this really tight, twisty, very low speed sector 2, and then this really, really long straight. So it requires a relatively low wing level. That isn't what you'd normally have with all those slow speed corners, but you've got to have it for the long straight. It's also a weekend where you can get a lot of incidents affecting the race. It's very easy if a driver makes a mistake there that it'll have to bring out the safety car in order to clear it up. But we haven't been pleased with our last couple of weekends. We're aiming higher than that. We were hoping to start this final part of the season in the same manner that we finished it, with a few race wins and some strong qualifying, and all of our effort is going into trying to get the maximum performance and trying to get back to weekends where we can come back pleased with the job we've done, hopefully come back with some trophies.
And Shav, just finally, after a weekend racing in Italy, perhaps the most important question is, were you able to experience any amazing pizza?
Well, we had to have pizza because there's no Indian restaurant, so we couldn't go for a curry. I did, so Thursday night and Saturday night, Diavola. It was pretty good. They don't generally do that oil, the chili oil, that normally you need to get enough of that on that you're right on the brink of ruining it. But yeah, decent pizza, nice and spicy, and enjoyed my time there.